Finally, a Middle Ages game. One that shows very little stonework. You play your match in Thatch. It's an RTS that takes place in and around that time, mostly in Northern Europe. Play as a Viking who really likes to focus his body paint. Slavs, Germans, Anglo-Saxons, and if you opt for the DLC, you play a campaign quite far removed from this area. You fight in their wars and play campaigns based on history as far as I can tell with my limited knowledge. I mean, one of the campaigns technically is about Robin Hood. But in spite of that opportunity to take license, I doubt there's much in the way of original storytelling. Mostly ad-lib dialogue and characterization in between the historically recorded moments in an attempt to add emotional context. Although I don't think it's that successful in the task. Did this guy really just say something villainous and twirl his mustache?
With his decision undermined, Edward's only choice was to face his strongest lord.
And the voice acting can sound a bit stilted and robotic at times, or at the very least generic.
They should have a room for us.
Wessex seems rather busy these days, with lots of wealthy merchants traveling through here.
This place looks expensive indeed. Still, I am sure we can find a room around.
But the game does have hand-drawn cutscenes, and usually in games those are very dry. But here I thought it was a bit more effective because it relayed a history of some very dark moments that I suppose I didn't expect. Not only conflict, but stuff like human sacrifice, and I believe ethnic religious cleansing. At the very least, a common theme is the friction between paganism and Christianity. Oh, are Terence and Philip doing a medieval sketch? The developers also aren't afraid about showing your side losing at the end. Or arguably worse, your side winning, and then committing atrocities. And this dark realism was really rather refreshing in spite of the story issues. The relaying of the story is also made a bit more impactful through in-game cinematic presentation. It's quite cool, but at times there can be glitches that can undermine the tech, and you can also zoom in on a unit as much as possible to enter the cinematic view. Doing this during combat can be quite visceral. Camera shake in the din of battle. Very nice if at times it does emphasize the unrefinement, or simply get obscured by foliage. How's the gameplay? Splendid. It kind of reminds me of Age of Empires 2, a very streamlined version of it, with fewer build options. You can't even pick where the buildings are built. At first it seems like all the different units are similar across the different factions, but as you play you will see some subtle and overt differences between them. The Slavs have horse archers, Anglo-Saxons have no cavalry, the Germans require research before they can upgrade armor, but then they have the cheapest armor in the game. So there are the obvious differences, and if you want to see a list of the more subtle ones, just create a skirmish match and have a read. I don't know if it's balanced, that's not really part of my expertise, but it's definitely cool, and resource collection is simplified as well. Because, as mentioned, the buildings are built in predetermined spots once you select them. Plus there are only 3 resources to collect: wood, food and metal. And those are collected by the villages you take over, after you invest in resource collection. The gathering options are cheap and quickly clicked, upon which the villagers automatically go where they're supposed to. So the villagers are kind of like slightly more complex versions of control points or strategic points, and those villagers can be attacked, so targeting those soft points can be a strategy. Since the villagers are self-starters, that frees up more time to focus on the combat, instead of your perfect settlement with imposing walls, because there's no option to build walls. If they're not there at the start of the map, you're not getting them. They're just build orders depending on your needs. This, however, would only be a pro if the combat were tactically absorbing. Worth the trouble. And it is. You have different units with different strengths and weaknesses, and you consider those for unit matchups in combat. A fairly standard mechanic in RTS games, but then you add the more subtle differences between factions, the fact that units can earn experience and level up, earning that squad a focus. Also you can upgrade the armor for that squad twice, so they're slower but also hardier. Then you consider terrain and the environment, use bushes for ambushes, trees so no one sees, plus trees make incoming projectiles less effective, so does rain. And lastly, you have to consider unit morale. The lower it is, the easier they go down, and you can break their spirits by using some Total War-esque tactics. Outnumber the enemy, flank them, attack them from behind. Use unit skills. All of these come together to create a game far more complex than you may have expected. Sure, the campaign AI isn't that clever, and a lot of times campaign levels become a bit of a slog fest instead of encouraging creative plays. I did play a skirmish match against an insane level AI. At first that was very difficult, but then I started winning. A fair amount of the time at least. I was training for my first and only ever online tournament. As usual, the game's online community is incredibly talented, so I didn't last long. But if you want the challenge and have the internet capacity, that's an option. But to summarize what this gameplay is about, when I finally beat that AI, the achievement I earned was uber micro. So I'm assuming getting to that level requires a mastery over its micromanagement and in-depth knowledge of the build order, so you immediately know what to do at all times. Visually, the game is brilliant. Very detailed, the buildings have cinematic touches and animations. I guess military action in the streets is a common thing here. Look at the water, the forests, the lightning bugs. Really slicks up the gameplay. Ooh, birds. It's so beautiful and the gameplay so absorbing that it takes you a while to realize there are no land animals. I think in villages you hear dogs, but I've never seen one. But the audio design is good, bringing to life any detail that the visuals couldn't. And you fill in the blanks. It just sounds great, and it has some decent music too. Sometimes bagpipes, sometimes throat singing. The single player has 8 base campaigns and I completed 7 of them. It kind of started to drag on, doing the same things over and over again. You can only sack villages so many times. But in all fairness, I sacked a lot of them for a lot longer than I thought it would entertain me. Plus, some of the missions were stealth missions, and here they work better than they usually work in this genre. But they can become a slog too. It was fun enough that I played the single player for about 35 hours. And the game is cheap on Steam, 205 Rand full price, 41 Rand on sale. That's 1 Rand 18 per hour of gameplay, which is quite splendid. And there is a free version available that's multiplayer only, the Peasant Edition. So if you're more of an online gamer anyway, and you want to try new RTS, this is a great option. But to download it is quite big, as it takes up 21.63 gigabytes on the hard drive. Kind of a lot for 35 hours, but that doesn't include multiplayer if you're gonna go that route though. And I did not even try it on the Warhorse. I'm pretty sure it would get pillaged. And stereotypically it is not kid friendly. Violence, swearing, gruesome history, 1 instance at least of nudity, religious prejudice. The game has great visuals, if a bit indistinct at times. The campaigns focus on Northern Europe, so it's mostly arboreal forest and thatch. But it is quite cinematic, although the RTS mechanics do take away from it at times. It has decent music with great throat singing and sound design, but in general it doesn't really wow you. It has great RTS gameplay and combat. It's very satisfying to annihilate a lone unit, sapping their morale within moments. So the combat is complex, mildly at least, if the building and resource management is not. And the stealth missions work better in this game than they usually do in RTSs, but they still give issues. On the maybe side, the story is history-based, with lackluster voiceovers and characterization, but with grim, satisfying, refreshing realism, and as said, it is presented in a cinematic way. That gets a bit more out of the story. Also, the factions are quite asymmetrical, and that can be cool, but balance issues may persist. It's just not my area of expertise, I don't know, I'm not sure. But I did have a skirmish match against an insane level AI. They were playing as the Anglo-Saxons, and they crushed me with heavily armored slingers. But I'm sure the skilled players of this game have a counter that I just don't know about. And on the con side, the campaign, while fun, can be a bit of a slog. maybe a bit repetitive. So much sacking. This sacks. It's absolute punishment. Also, the AI is not the best. They don't really inspire creativity. But in all fairness, a lot of RTSs suffer from this problem. At some point, you just start chucking units at them. Come on, play it. Reap a perverse joy from the era's apparent superweapon. The spike trap. Come on, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I'm a forgiving AI.
Choip, choip, choip. Choip, choip, choip.